Greetings to you all. My name is Benjamin Ferenz, and I'm speaking to you on June 18th in the year 2018 from Delray Beach, Florida. I want to thank the sponsors who've invited me to come, Sir Jeffrey Nice and his very competent assistant, Nina, and to greet all of the important teachers and guests who may be listening, including my son Don, who I understand will also be with you one of these days. I understand that you're also dealing with the problem of political influence in the connection with international criminal courts. And let me begin with that, because all of my thinking is readily available to all of you, free of charge, no citations and no commendations or no anything is required, only that you can use it in the interest of world peace. And it's all on my website, which is my name, benferenz.org. I would particularly recommend at this moment an old book I wrote, New Legal Foundations for Global Survival, which shows a comprehensive outline of the current status as it was then and where we might be going. And that was written 25 years ago. Kofi Annan was very pleased with that, and I gave it to the new Secretary General very recently. I think to approach the problem of political influence in the evolution of international criminal law, we have to begin with the United States. The United States only began to pay attention to the possibility of courts after the First World War. But let me begin with the foundation for the International Criminal Court as we know it today. At the end of World War II, I was a combat soldier in that war. I fought in every major battle. The Pentagon, when I was honorably discharged as a sergeant of infantry, gave me 5 battle stars for not having been killed or wounded in every major battle, from the beginning landings on Normandy Beach to the final Battle of the Bulge, which ended the war against Germany. So I have some experience of what war is like. Not only is that part of my training, but I was assigned in the last months of the war to be a war crimes investigator. I was the first man in the American Army to deal with war crimes. And they had given me that great honor because when I had graduated from the Harvard Law School as an honor graduate, I had also completed the work of research for a Harvard professor, Sheldon Gluck, who wrote a book on war crimes. And when they began to run into reports of war crimes, I'm sure they turned to him for advice, and he said, contact a former researcher of mine, he's there. And one day I was taken out of the artillery and sent to General Patton's headquarters and told to report to the Judge Advocate General there, and he asked me, what's a war crime? And that's how the war crimes investigation began in World War II. My jobs included not only finding the murderers of the flyers who were shot down and beaten to death by the German mobs over German territory, but also entering all the concentration camps that were being liberated as we went along. I won't go into the horrors of those camps. I think they should be well known to this particular audience. But it certainly had a traumatic effect on me. And I have, in fact, devoted practically my whole life to trying to deal with the problems of how do you cope with cruelty, incredible cruelty to other human beings. Our approach was to first have the end of the war. Secondly, to try the criminals. We did that at the military commissions immediately after the war, then the International Military Tribunal, and to set up programs to compensate some of the survivors. And after that, the most important thing was to try to prevent it from happening again. And I have been closely involved in all of those efforts for at least 75 years. And Now I'm only in my 99th year. So I wanted to share with you my feeling. What's it all about? Why do we do these things? What changes are possible? Is it possible? I've answered it in my own mind by saying, yes, it is possible. We can do the impossible. And I look around me and I look for examples of where we have done the impossible. For example, our American Constitution, a very good document copied from the French, it provides that women don't have the right to vote and can't own property. That was hailed as a great document at its time. Today, that doesn't exist anymore. Those women are beginning to come into equal rights with men. Still a far way to go, but it's certainly been a long way since the early constitutional days. We said, when I was growing up, if something was impossible, you were reaching for the moon. Yeah, we reached for the moon. I have pictures of the astronauts landing on the moon holding up the American flag. We also have reached cyberspace, which is good and maybe bad. That remains to be seen. But we've had so many different changes which were inconceivable. A man can marry a man, a woman can marry a woman. This was unheard of and considered absurd, impossible, even illegal, not too long ago. So the lesson drawn from that is, don't assume something is impossible just because it has never happened before. We have been glorifying war-making ever since the days that little David hit Goliath in the head with a rock. And so they made David the king, and he was a big hero. Well, my friends, everybody has to recognize times have changed. And as they was pointed out by the International Military Tribunal, the first of its kind after the Second World War, crimes are committed by individuals, and they must be held accountable in a rule of law. Law changes and has to change to meet the requirements of the world in which they hope to serve. And that process is beginning, but it's only beginning, and it's very slow moving. Let me now shift to the topic which is the primary focus of your consideration. What has happened? World War II came to an end. Everybody cheered the Americans. We were wonderful. We were heroes. We were kissed on all cheeks, on all sides. And the first General Assembly announced they were going to create a permanent international criminal court. They were going to set up a committee to define aggression. They would set up a committee to have a code of crimes. And all of this was going to be part of the charter plan for a more peaceful future, disarmament and international military force, etc. Then what happened to it? Politics came creeping in, which of course was unavoidable. And what became the American policy? Let me sum it up to you as I see it now, after having followed it very closely. By that I mean I've read everything that's been written on that subject, and I've attended most of the meetings of all the committees. I had no official status. I never have had any official status. Nobody can fire me because nobody hired me. And that's the way I like it, because I'm not for sale. I call the shots as I see them. And as I see the American policy, it's the following. And it goes back to the earliest days. An international criminal court, kill the idea if you can. If you can't kill the idea, stall as long as you can. And that has been the policy through all the different administrations since that time to this very day. How do I know that? Well, it follows logically, and it has been confirmed to me by people in the know from the inside. The idea that an American could be put before a foreign tribunal and held to a criminal act in connection with what the Americans considered necessary for their defense or for their advantage, that was not acceptable to American political opinion, and probably is not acceptable still today. The result has been, in order to have that accepted, the official position has been to lie to the American public consistently since the earliest days in 1945. Now, why do I use such strong language? Because it's true. And I give you examples. What did they say? They didn't say we're against defining aggression. Oh no, they said it's not good enough. The first definition of aggression is not good enough. We can't accept it because we have to have a good definition, which is going to be clear and going to protect everybody. But the definition is not good enough. Let the Security Council decide. And we had the unfair situation. The United States controls the Security Council together with the other major powers of the war. So referring it to the Security Council is like asking the fox to guard the hen house. That wasn't going to be acceptable. And then they continued on to find reasons to quibble about every single definition that was offered. The United States never put on the table a complete definition saying, here, we will accept this and have a fair definition on the table. They didn't do that. They quibbled and they said, this is not right, this is not right. Article 125.2 should be interpreted this way and one should be interpreted that way. We have a consensus definition in 1974, totally ignored because we didn't want to be bound by anything. So we've had that clear-cut experience of the United States opposing it. Why? Does that mean the American public is in favor of war? No, the American public is, like most publics, looks forward to a life of living in peace and harmony. But the president cannot be elected by more than a very small majority in the United States. It depends on 1 or 2%. And if he antagonizes the right wing, which is opposed to anything which would hinder the great United States from doing anything, if he were to oppose the very conservative group, he'll lose this 2% vote, that the controlling vote, and he won't have any office at all. So he's got to play ball. And you have the political influence in play all the time. And it's met by not telling the truth, that we're not prepared to accept the rule of law to govern our behavior as far as it comes to killing people. And the public is lulled into the belief that what we're doing is to protect the American interests, where it's, in fact, being used to maintain the status quo. What can you do about it? As professors, lawyers, I have reached my own conclusion. I have about given up on trying to persuade diplomats and politicians to accept a more humane point of view because of the political reasons. They need their jobs, they're more interested in their own power than in the welfare of their own subjects. It's a new idea. We have glorified war for centuries. Why suddenly do we have to change it? Is it safe? Can we do that? What about self-defense? What about if they're shooting at me now? I can't stop now. All of these arguments are brought out in order to maintain the status quo. The status quo, my friends, in my considered judgment, is the dumbest possible thing you can do, which will lead to total destruction of all human life on this planet. It may sound a little extreme, but let's take another look at it. First of all, what happens now? The head of two states, A and B, let's not get political here, A and B don't agree. What do? They send their young people, like you, compared to me, out to kill other young people whom they don't even know in a place they probably never even heard of. And when they get tired of killing each other, they pause, each side declares victory, and everybody's happy for a short time, and then they start again. And they spend all their money not on eliminating the causes of discontent, which drive people to desperation and terroristic acts. They spend it in spending more money on bigger weapons to kill even more people. So that we now have arrived at a space in time and history where we have the capacity from cyberspace. I never heard of cyberspace until an American general explained it to me. And from cyberspace, we can kill or we can cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth. That means that the hospital's lights go out, there is no clean water, everything is in total chaos as we now know it, and how long it will take before everybody on this planet is dead. I'm not aware of any study which has yet been done of that subject, but it won't take very long. The general with whom I discussed it said, well, it may depend upon how much water they have. If they have enough water, they probably could live for a week. If they didn't have enough water, it would probably be less. That, dear friends, is what you are looking at as your future unless you change your way of approaching these problems. And how should you change them? You cannot change the hearts and minds of people until you reach them at a time when they're amenable to change. I think our hope lies now with the young people. Your students, those who will be your students, have got to know that the current system may offer the illusion of safety for a while, but not for long, because the capacity to kill cannot be confined to one or two countries. It has to be spread, and it will be spread, and it is being spread. We have got to learn that it is not cowardice to look to compromise, that it is not unreasonable to try to find a middle ground, to consider every problem in a humane way. What does it mean to the human beings who are being affected by whatever policies we may be, whether it be immigration, or whether it be employment, or whether it be food, or even whether it be environment. All of those things which have universal effect on this planet have got to be brought under rational control, where we think not of killing the people, but of helping the people. The notion of absolute state sovereignty is absolutely obsolete in today's times, and we have to change the laws in order to meet the times of the day and the perils of the day. That's why we have lectures like the ones being organized by Professor Nice and his friends here now. And I cannot think of any better way to advance the cause of world peace, which is my goal, than to continue teaching and preaching that law is better than war. General Eisenhower was aware of that. He said so as President of the United States, that the world can no longer rely on force. It must turn to the rule of law if civilization is to survive. These are not ramblings of fools. They are statements from the highest military officers who have recognized it. And at a time when there are some people in the military and outside who believe that I am a fool following an idle dream, that it'll never happen, that the only thing that really counts is power. And if we have the power and the force, use it. If somebody doesn't like it, let them have it. That is not a new idea. It was the Peloponnesian Wars. The man who had the bigger fleet said to his opponent, one of the other Peloponnesian islands, why don't you surrender now? Because if you don't surrender, we will have to kill you all. If you do surrender, we'll make you slaves. And he couldn't surrender because it was a matter of honor, so they killed them all. I had the same argument after the Franco-Prussian War. Field Marshal von Moltke was arguing with Johann Caspar Bluntschli, the Heidelberg professor who thought we ought to have a conference of nations. And the Field Marshal said, are you crazy? You're going to substitute discussion for the nobility of fighting for your country, dying for your country. This is the greatest thing in life. Those basic thoughts are still with us today, although the world has so changed that they're markers for our doom. Now, people are moved by slogans, and so I've come up with slogans, and I hope that people will begin. I have it now on my car, my license plate. The slogan is law, not war. Now, it should be obvious to any human being with rational intelligence that a law settling instead of a war, that war itself is hell, no matter how you look at it. And law, even a bad decision, would be better than going to war. So I use that as my banner, law, not war. And I urge you to teach it to your students and those that come to you. But you may say, how do you get them to accept it? How do you get the others to accept it? Well, I know how you do it. Slowly. These are all prototypes. All the courts that you've been dealing with, the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, the International Court for Rwanda. When I met the Rwandan minister recently at the United Nations, first time was a woman. I was introduced, I shook her hand, and I said I want to apologize on behalf of the lawyers of the world. What we did to Rwanda, and allowed to happen when we knew it might happen, is a disgrace to humanity everywhere. And she apparently was touched by that apology, which I, of course, meant, because she mentioned it in her opening remarks. And so we have the capacity to live in a peaceful world. We have the resources to share the wealth of this planet in a rational way so that everyone can live in peace and human dignity. And still we glorify the old-fashioned war-making. Kill your enemy. Put your people to advise the government, those people who believe only in force, and that's the only thing that counts. So that's your issue. The issue is not so much why one court is influenced by this. They're all influenced by political considerations. It's all political. A man who can get a witness in defense of his friend will get his friend. A man who's afraid that he might be the next defendant will be against the courts. So there's a political foundation, and it can only be overcome by the higher court, and that's the court of public opinion. And you can shape that court as educators, but you must never give up, never give up, never give up. And I hope one day when this torch drops from my hand, one of you will pick it up and carry it forward to a more peaceful and humane world. I wish you all the best of luck. Goodbye.